Let's talk about teenage substance abuse. It's one of those tough, vexing problems that seems to be everywhere, but it's often really misunderstood. So, what's actually driving it? How deep does the connection to crime really go? And maybe the biggest question of all, are the things we're doing to fix it actually working? Today, we're going to dig into the data and see if we can find some real answers.
But before we dive into all the stats and charts, it's so important to remember what's at stake here. This isn't just an abstract policy debate. We're talking about real people, real lives. This story is about Helen Marie Whitty. She was 16 years old, and her life was tragically cut short. It's a gut-wrenching reminder of the very real, devastating consequences that we're here to try and understand.
So, just how widespread is this problem? Well, get ready for this number. According to self-report surveys, nearly 2/3, a full 64% of all high school seniors say they've used alcohol. I mean, just let that sink in. That's a staggering figure, and it really paints a picture of the sheer scale we're dealing with.
When you see a number that big, it immediately brings up two huge questions, right? First, why is this happening on such a massive scale? And second, what's the real cost here, not just in human terms, but for society as a whole? We're going to try to unpack both of those questions.
All right, first up, let's get our arms around the true scope of the problem by taking a look at the data and the trends over time.
Now, the story here isn't a simple straight line. You might be surprised to hear that illicit drug use among 12th graders actually peaked way back in the late 1970s. It dropped for a while, then ticked back up in the mid-90s. So the good news is today's levels are lower than those peaks. But the bad news? Well, as we're about to see, this problem is far from being solved. So when we say substance use, what are we really talking about? Well, for all the headlines you might see about other drugs, the data is crystal clear. Alcohol is still the dominant one. 58% of high school seniors used it in the past year. Marijuana comes in a distant second, and then you have a pretty significant number, 14%, who are misusing prescription drugs.
Okay, so that's the what. Now let's get into the much trickier question, the why. What is actually driving young people to use these substances to begin with?
Well, it's super complex, but the reasons tend to fall into two main buckets. On one hand, you've got social factors, things going on in the world around them. Think poverty, intense peer pressure, or a really difficult family life. Then, on the other hand, you have personal factors, things from within. This could be struggles with emotional problems, a genetic predisposition, or even what researchers call rational choice, which is just a fancy way of saying they believe using will make them feel better or have more fun.
And this brings us to one of the most talked about and debated ideas in this whole conversation, the gateway drug theory. The basic idea is that for a lot of kids, it starts with legal substances like alcohol. And while most of them stop right there, the theory suggests that for some, that early experimentation can kind of open the gate to using more serious drugs down the road.
And this is where the conversation gets even more serious. We have to talk about the direct and, frankly, dangerous link between substance abuse and crime.
The connection here is pretty stark. Just look at these numbers. A teen who uses marijuana is nearly twice as likely to be suspended from school. They're over 4 times more likely to commit a major theft, and 3 times more likely to carry a handgun. The link is right there in the data. It's undeniable.
And here is a crucial point to understand. It's a relatively small group of adolescents who are struggling with substance abuse that's responsible for a huge, disproportionate share of all serious crime. Some research suggests this small core group accounts for up to 60% of all reported major offenses. That's massive.
Okay, so we've established there's this huge problem, and we know it's deeply connected to crime. So what are we actually doing about it? Let's break down the main strategies that have been used for drug control.
For a long time, the so-called war on drugs has been fought on 3 main fronts. First, you've got law enforcement, trying to cut off the supply. Second, you have education, with school programs aimed at preventing kids from starting in the first place. And third, you have treatment, which is designed to step in and help those who are already struggling.
But that's not the only philosophy out there. Another approach that's gained a lot of traction is something called harm reduction, and it's a really different way of thinking. Instead of focusing only on stopping all drug use, this approach tries to minimize the most dangerous consequences. We're talking about things like needle exchange programs to stop the spread of disease, or special drug courts that push for treatment instead of just jail time.
And all of this brings us to our final section, and really the biggest question of all. Where do we possibly go from here? Because it really feels like we are at a major crossroads when it comes to drug policy.
The whole debate about the future really starts with one single number: $1 trillion. That's the estimated financial cost of the 40-year war on drugs. I mean, that's a number so huge it's almost impossible to wrap your head around, and it forces you to ask a very tough question. Has it been worth it?
And that question brings us to the core debate happening right now. On one side, you have the prohibition argument. This side says we need to maintain strict laws and penalties to deter people from using because legalizing would just lead to more addiction and problems. But on the other side, you have the legalization argument. This side says we should decriminalize drug use and focus on treatment, arguing that it's prohibition itself that actually fuels violent black markets and crime.
And that's where we'll leave it, with this one final provocative question. After decades of effort, after a truly staggering amount of money has been spent, and with the problem, well, still very much with us, is it time to fundamentally rethink our approach? The answer is anything but simple, and it's a debate that's going to shape our world for years to come.
I will